They didn't invite me to join the meeting where the company was rescued from downfall, yet I was the one who made the decision that turned it around. That autumn, the foliage in Charlotte never fully changed. It simply curled and browned as if it were too weary for the show. I remember observing them from the conference room window because I was there the day the city grant was approved. The Whitaker and Langston Group was struggling. The 2008 crash had devastated the housing market. By the time my father's health started to decline, our company had more unfinished historical restorations than cash flow. My brother Chase had relocated to New York by then, creating something he referred to as a brand ecosystem centered around urban futurism. He gave TED Talks and started a podcast about smart cities that fizzled out after 6 episodes. Meanwhile, I had been managing a small architectural firm in Boston that specialized in sustainable restoration. Nothing extravagant. But when the call came, stating that Dad was in the hospital and the board was anxious as clients were leaving, I didn't think twice. I came back home. No title, no assurances, just a pile of NDAs, an incomplete grant proposal, and our finance head's voice saying, "Thank goodness you're here, Avery." For 3 years, I quietly rebuilt. I renegotiated our contracts with preservation organizations, secured a federal revitalization grant, and urged the city to support our culturally important projects with tax incentives. The WNL that had been on the brink was alive again. Chase would visit occasionally, snap a few photos for his social media, shake hands at groundbreakings. He was always introduced as Samuel Whitaker's son. I was simply Avery from operations. I told myself it didn't matter. What truly mattered was that we hadn't lost the historic district redevelopment. What mattered was that the board didn't disband the firm. And honestly, I didn't crave the spotlight. I just wanted the work to be done well. Yet sometimes, when I stayed late in my father's office to complete budgeting reports, I'd pause at his desk. In the far right corner, tucked between 2 legal pads, was a framed picture of me at 8 years old. I was wearing a hard hat 2 sizes too large, one hand gripping my father's thumb at a dusty job site. He had always kept that picture there. I never inquired why. One evening, about 2 years into my return, we reached a significant milestone. The Jefferson Row project had finally passed inspection after months of holdups. I worked late with the team to send out final compliance reports and contacted the press team about a low-key write-up in the Charlotte Ledger. Nothing major, just something for the community to see. The next morning, there was a press release. It quoted my father, expressing gratitude for the vision of our next generation and commended Chase for motivating us to look ahead, not behind. My name wasn't mentioned. I reread the paragraph 3 times. It felt as if my body was elsewhere entirely. Not angry, just detached. That week, we held a small investor dinner at the columns of our family estate, which we now rented for events. I arrived early to help set up. I was adjusting a framed rendering of our latest project when I glanced over at the main table. The centerpiece had been replaced. Where my childhood photo once sat on my father's desk, now stood a glossy 11 and 14 of Chase, shaking hands with the mayor at a tech conference. He looked cheerful, confident, perfectly lit. I didn't say a word. I simply excused myself and took a stroll behind the garden. I leaned against the stone wall my great-grandfather had laid by hand and listened to the wind rustling through bare branches. And for the first time in years, I wondered if the work wasn't sufficient. What would be? It began with the parking space, the one outside the downtown office building marked with a small white sign reserved C. Whitaker. I hesitated when I saw it. That spot had been vacant for months. No one occupied it, not even visiting contractors. I still parked in the garage across the street as I always had. When I entered, Chase was in the lobby shaking hands with someone from Langston Bank. He smiled as if he had been there all along. "Hey, sis," he said, patting me on the shoulder, like I was just another attendee at the gathering. You should have seen the excitement in Dad's eyes when I told him I was coming back full-time. That afternoon, an internal email was sent out. It announced with enthusiasm that Chase Whitaker would be taking on the role of Chief Innovation Officer. Innovation, a term that conveys everything and nothing. He moved quickly. Within weeks, our office was filled with branding consultants, digital experience strategists, and young analysts who kept saying phrases like, "Give me the heritage experience." They proposed augmented reality walkthroughs of the Jefferson Row, project, QR codes on bricks, and a subscription newsletter called Living the Legacy. I requested a private meeting. "I'm not against modernization," I said, "but we built trust by respecting the past. We promised these communities dignity, not spectacle." He grinned as if I was being nostalgic. "You've done amazing groundwork, Avery. Seriously. But the city is progressing. People want narratives, not just structures." When I discussed it with our father later, he patted my hand and said, "You're the stable one. Let your brother try." Let him try. I remembered when trying meant learning zoning laws, attending neighborhood council meetings, and waking up at 5 a.m. to negotiate with suppliers over reclaimed wood prices. I watched as Chase submitted proposals that read like tech manifestos. He pitched to private investors for projects that hadn't been properly scoped. He reallocated funds from one restoration to finance a sleek video campaign called The New. South Speaks, complete with drone footage and a soundtrack reminiscent of a Levi's commercial. One afternoon, our finance director slipped into my office, visibly uncomfortable. "He signed off on a 6-figure production package, Avery. It wasn't even reviewed by the board." I sent a formal inquiry to Dad. No response. 3 days later, I was removed from the email thread regarding investor communication. That Friday, I arrived early. I went to the archives, a small project records room where we stored every permit, every meeting note, every community letter from the past decade. I retrieved the original grant proposal I had written for the Franklin Theater renovation. The paper was soft at the edges. I could still see the ink mark where I had pressed my pen too hard in frustration after 3 revisions. It was the kind of document no one would ever frame, yet it had held a company together. As I slid it back into its sleeve, something caught my eye on the upper shelf. A dusty stack of proposal folders labeled deferred projects I had fought for, sites that held significance culturally, not commercially. I took one and opened it. The Henderson Library, a former Black literacy school turned community center. Chase had discarded it last week, claiming it wasn't scalable. I sat on the floor with that file in my lap and quietly asked myself, when did doing the right thing start meaning so little? The invitation arrived in a soft cream envelope sealed with the company crest. Whitaker and Langston Founders Dinner, honoring the next generation. I already knew what it was. The dinner was to be held at the columns of our family's historic estate, now used for board events and high-end fundraisers. I had restored it myself, negotiated every window permit, chosen the paint that matched, the original 1894 finish, even salvaged the rotting cornices with my own hands, and now I was to attend as a guest. Upon arrival, Chase was already captivating the audience beneath the chandelier. His tie slightly loosened for effect. A branded banner hung behind him, proclaiming the future Whitaker next. I froze at the phrase, "No Langston, just Whitaker." Dinner was served under a tent adorned with fairy lights. I was seated at a side table with retired board members and a few junior consultants. The main table, where my father sat, had an empty chair. For a moment, I thought it was meant for me. But just before the speeches commenced, Chase stepped up behind my father and took that seat. The photographer captured the moment, and when they toasted to the new chapter, no one glanced in my direction. The speech was brief. My father stood slowly, his voice weaker than I remembered, but clear. "Tonight is about legacy," he said, "and about the bravery to look ahead. I built this company on tradition, but the future belongs to those who can reimagine it." He placed a hand on Chase's shoulder. "This is the right hands now. Chase understands what's next." The crowd cheered. I didn't because I was too busy replaying the phrasing in my mind, the right hands. Later, as guests chatted, I slipped back into the main house, into the room that used to be our father's study. Everything had been rearranged. The books I'd cataloged for the preservation fund had been boxed. My notes on the Lincoln Mill project were gone. And on the desk sat a sleek silver plaque. Chase Whitaker, Chief Innovation Officer. I opened the center drawer. My old project ledger was still there, creased and held together by habit. But on top of it lay something else. The Jefferson Row plans rebranded with a new logo. WHTKR in bold all caps. A startup-style typeface. No heritage. No soul. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I simply placed the old Franklin Theater proposal, creased edges and all, on top of the WHTKR folder. And I closed the drawer. I departed before dessert. No one noticed. As I walked past the reflecting pool in the back courtyard, I paused for just a moment. The surface was calm. The lights from inside flickered across it. For a moment, it resembled fire trapped under glass. I recalled something my grandfather used to say. If you're not at the table, make sure you know who said it. That night, I wasn't at the table, but I knew exactly who had built it. 3 weeks after the dinner, I received a call from Marisol, a city planner I used to work with while fighting to save the Henderson Library. "I thought you left," she said, her voice low. "But I figured, you should know. We're being inundated with rezoning requests tied to your family name." I didn't reply immediately, she continued. "It's that smart city parcel on East 6th. They're trying to rush it through council approval, but none of the community organizations have signed off." I shut my laptop. The last time I'd seen that site proposal, it was still conceptual. Historic textile district, high foot traffic, fragile zoning, and deeply, deeply protected. By the end of the month, my inbox was overflowing with auto-forwarded threads, lawsuits, protests, anonymous leaks from staffers quitting mid-project. One subject line read simply, "WHTKR accused of misleading investors." I never opened them. I didn't need to, because I knew exactly where the cracks would form. Chase had taken what we built, stable, meticulous, painful, and turned it into a pitch deck. He'd promised impact studies before breaking ground, lied about permits, and pulled in venture capital from out-of-state tech firms that believed revitalization meant placing a touchscreen kiosk beside a bronze plaque. And now it was unraveling. The city council froze the East 6th project. The mayor distanced herself in a statement. Former clients withdrew from the downtown renovations completely. The worst came in the form of a photograph. A friend texted it to me. No caption. Just an image taken outside the columns on a Thursday afternoon. An empty parking lot, overgrown hedges, a faded banner half unhooked from the gate flapping sideways in the wind. No people, no lights, just a name gradually being reclaimed by the weather. My father had a minor stroke the day the council vote became public. Chase flew to Denver to meet with backers. I stayed home, not because I didn't care, but because I understood something no one else in that family ever seemed to grasp. When a house collapses, you don't run back inside just because you helped build it. That weekend, I drove past the columns one last time. I didn't enter. I simply parked across the street and watched as a cleaning crew loaded remnants into a van. Centerpieces, folding chairs, unused signage. Then I spotted her. Clarice, the groundskeeper's wife who had been there since my childhood. She was pulling weeds at the front gate, her back to me. I almost rolled down the window, almost called her name, but I refrained because I didn't want to hear the question in her voice. Where were you when it all fell apart? That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the proposal folder from the Henderson Library. I hadn't opened it in over a year. Inside was a copy of a community letter signed by 32 families asking for our assistance. It had coffee stains along. The edges, my notes in pencil, the corners curled from heat exposure, likely left too close to the radiator during one long night. It was, without a doubt, the best thing we never got to do. So I picked up the phone, not to contact my father, nor Chase, but someone else, someone who still believed in what restoration meant. The next morning, I sent a package. No return address, no note, just 3 items. A copy of the original Henderson proposal, a flash drive containing my complete audit of Chase's zoning violations, and a single line handwritten in blue ink. Legacy isn't what you say you're building. It's what survives when your name fades. 6 months later, the old Henderson Library reopened its doors. Not with a ribbon cutting, not with headlines or news cameras, just a quiet email to neighborhood groups and a paper flyer pinned to church bulletin boards. Community resource space, now open, welcome back. People arrived with folding chairs, secondhand books, and stories. They didn't know my name, and that was the point. I had used the last of my savings and a quiet buy-in from 2 preservation nonprofits to create a new initiative. No branding, no marble signage, just a 4-word mission: respect the people first. The building kept its scars: exposed brick from the original foundation, uneven flooring from where the roof had sagged for years. We didn't fix the past, we honored it, and gradually people came. Single mothers seeking tutoring space, a retired architect wanting to teach hand drafting again, a girl with pink headphones who sat in the same chair every Tuesday just to read in silence. No one asked who owned the place, and I didn't share it because it didn't matter. One rainy afternoon, I received a letter. It was from my father. The envelope was thin, the handwriting shaky. Avery, I don't know how to start. I know you tried to protect what I built, and I know I didn't see you. Not completely. They tell me Chase is under investigation. I haven't heard from him. I miss the sound of your heels in the hall. I miss your order. If you're willing to talk, the door is open. Dad. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because some doors aren't meant to be reopened. Some are meant to remain exactly as they are, closed with silence on the other side. Weeks later, I encountered Clarice at the farmer's market. She asked if I'd heard that WHTKR was officially shut down. The assets were being liquidated, the staff released. They said the leadership collapsed, she said, her voice flat. Said there was no direction. I nodded. She looked at me for a long moment, then gently asked, "Did you ever get your photo back?" I smiled because I hadn't, but I'd framed something else. Inside the Henderson building, in the back reading room, I'd hung a photo I'd found buried in the archives. Not of me, but of my grandmother. She stood on scaffolding, sleeves rolled up, pencil behind her ear, pointing at a column during a church renovation in 1965. No hard hat, no clipboard, just determination. She had never received credit for her work, but she was there. I placed a small plaque under the frame she built before they let her sign. In that moment, I realized I wasn't rebuilding their legacy. I was reclaiming my own, and I didn't need a crest, a nameplate, or a headline to do it. I just needed bricks, light, a key that turned in the door each morning, and people who remembered what had been lost and felt acknowledged in what had returned. Avery never issued a press release. She never appeared on a podcast, wrote a tell-all, or claimed the company had wronged her. She didn't need to because there, in the heart of the city, stood a building she'd saved. It spoke for her, and it conveyed more than Chase ever could. It was autumn again in Charlotte. The trees turned beautifully this time, rich ochres and reds, as if they were finally allowed to experience everything all at once. I visited the columns one last time, not to enter, just to stand across the street and look. The estate was serene. The building had been repossessed and awaited a buyer. The WHTKR lettering had been removed from the main gate, leaving faint outlines, ghosts of a name that was never meant to endure. But someone had tidied the walkway. The hedges had been trimmed, and right by the entrance, attached to the iron fence with 4 quiet bolts, was something new. A bronze plaque. Clean, simple, no embellishment. It read, "Originally restored under the oversight of Avery Whitaker, whose contribution was not listed in public record. This correction is permanent." I hadn't placed it there. I never discovered who did. Weeks later, a friend texted me a photo. The plaque had been featured in a local preservation blog. No context, just the image and a caption. Some legacies survive even when you erase the name. Back at Henderson, the first children's art class began in the basement studio. Paper leaves taped to the wall, crayons scattered everywhere, tiny shoes kicked under tables. I stood in the hallway as they painted. One girl asked if she could use the color gold for the roof, even though the real one was black. I told her she could. She beamed like it was the first time anyone had said yes. I lingered a bit longer that day. Before departing, I walked to the back room where my grandmother's photo still hung. I reached out and slightly adjusted the frame. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped outside. No press followed, no interviews happened, but the building remained illuminated. The key stayed warm, and the truth remained intact. I didn't leave a note, didn't file a trademark, didn't correct the record in print. I didn't have to because the legacy didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be genuine.